independent authors in the house tonight, can you just come up here quickly? We'd just like to take your photograph with Leslie. Please indulge me, people. We won't be 2 minutes. Tony Cox, all those that have launched books here that are in the house. Jane Waratunga. Come, Reggie. Thank you. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you very much. As most of you know, we support independent South African authors, and we're very proud to do that. And yes, we need to have this photograph taken. Hello. I welcome you on behalf of Skoobs Theatre of Books. My name is Deborah. On behalf of Kirsten Ralston, the store manager, and myself, we welcome you to the best bookshop in Johannesburg without a doubt. It's the only bookshop that you need to be coming to, because we have fabulous international authors. I read your bio today, man, and Kirsten and I were pretty impressed with you. We have some really cool questions for you tonight. Oh, we do. Leslie Pearse, does she need any introduction? So, fans, big fans. Who's got all her books? Come on. Yeah! Obviously, you follow Leslie Pearse on Twitter, Facebook, and Skoobs Theatre of Books now. If you haven't been here before, please check our events page out on Skoobs Theatre of Books. We do a whole lot of these gorgeous events, probably 3 times a week, and we invite you all to these launches. We've got some sublime authors coming through, and we're so proud to have you here tonight, Les. We've got a manuscript. I know you've got a couple of books. We've got a manuscript in our office that we're reading as well.
The Woman in the Woods.
That's the next one. We're going to talk about that tonight. And we are just so excited to have her here tonight. So everybody, enjoy yourself tonight. And I want to hand over to Kirsten. Thanks very much for coming to the
Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome again. Thank you very much for coming out to meet our lovely author, Leslie Pearse, this evening. And thank you very much to Penguin Random House for giving us the opportunity to have Leslie here at Skoobs tonight. So I've planned a few questions for you. Mustn't be afraid, I promise. But I have been told that you do like to talk.
Yes.
Yes. So that's quite a good thing. I'm quite happy about that. Okay. So as Deborah was saying, we read your bio today, which was very, very interesting. And we wanted to know, our first question was, you had a very unusual childhood. And do you think this planted a seed in your head to become a writer?
When I was a child, my storytelling ability was just referred to as telling lies. So that's where it springs from, because you know, when you think you're a fat little thing with crooked teeth and sticky out hair, making up something is a good idea. Some of my best stories were ridiculous things, like telling the class that we used to live in India in the White Marble Palace, and I had an ayah, and mongooses came up on the thing. I had a bit of Rudyard Kipling coming into this, and my father rode a black stallion called Prince, and my stepmother said, the only thing your father ever rode was his bike, so I shot down in planes with that. But that's where it started from, and I'm afraid I used to tell some tall tales. But they were always stories rather than telling lies to get out of trouble. I could, I was always in trouble as well, but I didn't so much lie about that. You got that too?
That'll do. You've written a lot of books. What is your favourite book that you've written? Do you have a favourite one?
Yes. It used to be Never Look Back, the Wagon Train book, but I think now it's Belle, because I love Belle, How many people have read Belle here? Oh, good. Did you all like it? And did you love Etienne? I would like to have him cloned for womankind. I'm still looking for my Etienne. I think he's probably so old now, he's probably not up to much, but you know. Yeah, we can dream. Yeah.
Are your characters based on real people, so people that you've known or your family, or are they purely imaginary and made up?
Mostly they're purely made up. I've killed my stepmother off a few times, a couple of times. She comes in under various disguises, you know, but she was also a very entertaining woman, so sometimes I remember, like for instance, she used to say, "I have net curtains to keep out the vulgar gaze." I mean, what a wonderful expression that is. And if ever there was anybody who started me on the writing career, it was her, really, without knowing. She gave me a love of words. She used to actually write down words that she liked, and she used to say, like, "Isn't swill a nasty word? When people say swill the bowl round, why do they have to say that, swill?" And, you know, that sort of stayed with me about that. So she comes into books sometimes, and I've had the odd person I've had some sort of relationship with has crept in, where I thought they were quite funny. One of my early books, Camellia, there was a guy called Aidan Murphy who was a wild Irishman with blue eyes and black hair, one of those ones that's absolutely drool-worthy. I was living in Chelsea and all the girls were in love with this guy, and he was too scary to have a scene with, even if you wanted to know. But he died suddenly of cirrhosis of the liver, I think. Yes, and I gave him a 3-in-a-bed scene in Camellia in honour of what I wouldn't have minded doing. I didn't use his right name, by the way. No.
Okay, your latest book, which you're launching tonight, Dead to Me, I've had the pleasure of reading it. It was fantastic. And I loved your two main characters, Verity and Ruby. They were fantastic. If you had to pick two actresses who would play them in a movie version of the book, did you have anybody in mind?
No, because I've got Alzheimer's now, and I can't remember any actresses' names. You know, I could remember ones like Marilyn Monroe that are far too old and dead, you know. But any of the young up-and-coming actresses, I can't think of their names, so I'd be completely hopeless. I used to dream with my first book of Georgia, and in those days, that would have been Whitney Houston played her part. But I've stopped dreaming because I thought this was a negative sort of thing, and I better stop it and just hope that when the time came, that somebody else was perfectly capable of picking the right actress. So no, I can't think of anybody.
Now, your latest book, which I've only read as a manuscript, and what we're expecting in June, July, is The Woman in the Woods. And it deals with some very disturbing social issues. So in this case, it's child abuse. Is highlighting problems in society important to you when you write?
Yes, I think it is, particularly crimes against young boys. I think everybody's aware of the things that can happen to girls, and most parents protect their daughters pretty well, as much as you can in this day and age. But I have noticed, I did the book Trust Me about the boys that were sent off to Australia, that so many of them were abused, and I spent a lot of time with men that had been children then, and I found it profoundly disturbing that people didn't seem to care or thought that boys could have it. And there's the other thing about it as well, that the amount of people who think any abuse to boys is just gay stuff, and that's okay then, but it isn't, because it isn't gay behaviour. You know, gays are not necessarily going to be child abusers. In fact, they're very unlikely to be. And yes, I did think it was important. Once I started on this tack, it actually made me feel a bit sick at times to think of what can be done and how scary it is. But I've got two grandsons, one's 18, one's only 7, but the thought of anybody ever hurting them in that way, because I think boys have less defences against it. I know that sounds a crazy thing, but I can say this because I've got 3 daughters. I think girls are more able to deal with stuff or to get away from it, but boys are more trusting because they don't expect a man to come and get hold of them, you know?
Okay, on a more personal note, what do you do when you're not writing?
I lay on a bed and eat chocolate. No, that's not true at all. I garden. I would like to lay on the bed and eat chocolate, but no, I walk the dog, I do a lot of gardening, I like sewing as well, and I like shopping. Shopping is almost, you know, my reason to live, you know, and it's the redistribution of wealth, which I think is a good thing as well.
For the economy, yes. And you're obviously one of our favourite authors. Who are your favourite authors?
Well, at the moment, I've got a big thing about C.J. Sansom. Have any of you read any of his books? The Shard Lake series. For those of you who don't know, he's a hunchback lawyer in the time of Henry VIII, and he sort of solves crimes, and he's absolutely brilliant. You can smell London with all its nastiness and everything. It's really good, and all the court intrigue, and I've got really hooked on him. His books are huge. I'm down to the last one now, but I like thrillers. I've just read the new Karen Slaughter, which nobody else will have read yet because I got a preview copy, and that's brilliant. I don't read really books like mine anymore because I can't find them. I think the last book I read that I could really relate to as being like mine was Thornbirds. So, and that was an awful long time ago, which that is the book that set me off. I read that book one night while feeding the baby, came to with a baby on an empty breast to find that I'd been there all night reading that book. And as I walked down the stairs from the bedroom, I thought, I want to write books like that keep people rooted to the chair. So that's always been my thing. But I have found that there aren't so many books like that about anymore now, but I love thrillers.
And as we said, we were reading your bio today, so we did find something rather interesting. Do you want to tell us about being a bunny?
It's a very funny thing that everybody always wants to ask me about being a bunny, and in fact it was not exactly the high spot of my life. I went for the audition with a friend who wanted to work there more than life itself, because at that time you could earn £15 a week in an office or £30 at the Bunny Club. And they picked me. I was only holding a hand. They picked me and not her, just because I had long legs, big boobs, and was well spoken. And all the sort of princes of fame and fortune, you know, like your big stars, Peter O'Toole and all that lot, they'd stopped going to the Bunny Club at that time, and it was sort of basically northern businessmen that were down on a jolly for the weekend and that kind of thing, and travelling salesmen that were all a bit sleazy, and they were all over 40, which to us was terribly old. But it did do me a power of good because it gave me confidence, because I had never thought that I was raving beauty or anything. Of course I am, now as I know now, but I didn't know that then. And yes, because you used to get your hair and makeup done and things like that, and it was 8-hour sessions on 4-inch stilettos is no fun, I can assure you. Probably why I'm hobbling around now. Yeah. So it wasn't that glamorous, I'm afraid.
We ran a bit of a competition on Twitter, obviously on Twitter, for people to write in and ask you a question. And we've had the winning question, and I'd like to ask you that. First I want to ask, is Nicole MacDonald here? The question came from Nicole MacDonald. She's not here? Okay, we can find her on Twitter. But her question was, in a parallel universe, you can be any of your book characters. Who would you be and why?
I think I'd be Belle. Now, my sister said to me after she read, my sister believes that everything that happens in my books has happened to me in real life. And those of you who've read Belle know what she got up to. So my sister said, please tell me you didn't ever do that. And I said, oh no, Selina. I said, you know that I'm too gormless to ask for money. And with that, I left her with the thought that, oh God, she's done it for nothing. So that's it. So I rebel. But I did put my own spin on her, because I thought, if ever I was forced into a situation where I had to be a prostitute, I would decide to be the best of the best. However kinky that made me or whatever, I would be like that, because I wouldn't want to be down there, I want to be up at the top. So, is that all right?
Hopefully Nicole's happy with that answer. Okay, that's the end of my questions, but now I'd like to open it up to the guests to see if they'd like to ask you something. Anybody? There's a lady over there with her black fascinator who would like to ask you a question, because she's already told me.
Why do I like low light?
Well, I've often thought if I could go back and be reincarnated, I would find myself at the bottom of the pile. You know, like some people think they were Cleopatra in a previous life. I know that I was right down there, because I've got an affinity with chambermaids, kitchen maids, prostitutes, anything like that. I am fascinated by the lower strata of life. I don't want to be in it, you understand. I just feel that I know my way around. And it's really funny, when I start writing about it, I have utter confidence in what I write about that. But if I started to write about the nobility or anything, I would be floundering, I wouldn't be able to do it. And I came from a sort of middle-class background, really, so it's rather odd. But that's where I was, so I was down there.
Anybody else with a question? Kim?
For the authors in the audience, if you could go back in time with the knowledge that you have now, is there anything that you would do different in your career?
In my writing career?
Yes.
No, because I think I would like it to go a bit faster. I mean, it took me 7 years to get my first book published, and I've been writing for years before that. No, I don't think so. I think that probably back in the day when I started writing, they did say that until you were 40, you didn't have enough to write about in your life. And I actually think that's probably quite true. I know there are lots of very young writers now, but I think if you were going to write a sort of big book, a fictional book, you probably do need to have more experience than that. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think I've led a charmed life. I often wake up and think, am I going to pinch myself and find I'm back in some horrible little bed sit with no money and some, you know, owing money and nothing nice to wear and one thing and another. I have to pinch myself that I actually live in a nice house and I'm okay.
And if you put aside the fact that you are a well-known author, what is different today about publishing your book than it was when you started?
I think it's got harder to get published now than it was when it was bad enough when I started, but I think it's worse now. And of course, there's people are doing, you know, publishing on the internet and everything, which, although it might give people the idea that they're getting on the road to success, I suspect it's a false trail, and that without a major publishing company behind you, you're not ever going to get beyond a few copies, really. That's my thought on the subject. I don't know if I'm right about this, but I know there's been exceptions like 50 Shades of Grey that was plucked out of nowhere and everything, but I don't know that there's a great book that's ever been published on the internet and then's been taken up by a major publisher. Yeah, I think it's much harder now because there's so many people out there doing it. Because let's face it, everybody who can write a shopping list thinks they can write a book. I mean, all of us, and you that are writing, you've probably heard people say, oh, I'm going to write a book, or I've started to write a book, or I've got one in the cupboard and I could write a book. They all claim that. And, you know, one just has to bite your lip and think, well, why don't you get it published then, if you've written it? But it is something that people think they can do. No one thinks they can play at the Albert Hall on the piano without a lesson, do they? Or be a Monet without any talent to write it. But for some reason, everybody thinks that they can write a book. I wish they'd stop it, because they ought to look at people like me and see how special we are. Of course not.
Over there?
Can you still do the bunny dip?
I probably could if my knees weren't so stiff. Yeah, it doesn't look the same when you're twice the size you used to be, and you haven't got your costume on.
Questions, man with the red hat?
Can you come down and say that?
Do you use a Kindle or an e-book reader?
Oh, I did have a Kindle, and I loved it when I first got it, but I found that without the cover and without the blurb on the back of the book, that by the next morning when I'd been reading, I couldn't remember what I'd read. So I've gone back to reading real books, and it's a much nicer experience, because you do need a job. I see people nodding. I'm glad to see other people agree. I think we lose something with the electronic thing. It's handy on a flight or on holiday, but where you can concentrate on reading it. But it's not much good for picking up a book and then putting it down and that kind of thing, because you just forget. And it's so hard to go back to the beginning, to check up on stuff. So I say, bring back real books.
Yeah, you're in the right place for that. Yes, Jan?
Do you still do this when you get a new book published?
No. I used to sniff it, I used to worship it, but you do get a bit blasé. People think you won't, but you do. I remember when my first book, Georgia, came out, I was told by my agent that at Heathrow Airport, in one of the terminals, they had a whole row of them, and I got my daughter in the car and we drove up to it, even though it was 100 miles. And we got in there and it was we saw this whole row of them. And I took sneaky photographs of it, but my daughter was only 13, went up to the gormless girl behind the counter, because they weren't people like in your bookshop. And she said, my mummy wrote that book, and this girl said, oh yeah, showing her gum. And we escaped, feeling rather embarrassed by it. But that was such a thrill, seeing it for the first time there, but you do get used to that, yeah. And in fact now, when they send me 24 copies of my new paperback, I actually think, where the hell am I going to put those? Which is a bit of a drag. And my foreign rights now, I've got an attic full, and now if I find anybody Swedish, Norwegian, anything, French, whatever, I'm shoving the books into their hands, because I used to think it'd be nice to have one of each, but they just take up too much room. And what are you going to do with them when you snuff it, you know?
Anybody else? Man at the back? What advice would you give to upcoming writers?
Persistence is the key. You know, don't let anybody put you off. If you want to write and you really think you can write, don't let anybody stop you, just keep at it. I know when I first started, I was writing one night and some friends of my husband's came round, and he stood behind me while I was typing and he said, I don't know why you're bothering to do that, Leslie, you're never going to get published. And it was ironic that a few years ago, I happened to be in one of the big supermarkets and he was standing there looking at a pile of my books, and I crept up behind him and I said, oh, let's face it, Leslie, you're never going to get published. And he was at least honest. He said, you know how many times I've been embarrassed about what I said? But no, people are so keen to put you off. But I think there's a little voice inside you that tells you if you've got what it takes. And if you think that voice is the right one, you go ahead. Because I certainly did. I just was so sure I could write bestseller. that no one was going to stop me. I didn't write for the money. I never thought how much money I was going to make, only that I wanted to see that book in print, and I think that's the important thing.
Lady at the back.
I don't really plan. I sort of start off with the characters and the place, and then it just sort of comes out. I do keep a timeline of the ages of people, because, you know, if you've got a 20-year time thing, you know, and somebody's 16, you've got to know how old they are at the end, and all the other people that come into it. And the bits and pieces that you said about, it's handy to keep the hero having brown eyes and not suddenly changing to blue eyes later on, etc. Yeah, the continuity of it. But I don't really plan it as such, and I certainly don't know the end of the book when I start. I wish I did. I mean, one of my books, Remember Me, which was a true story about a woman who was sent to Australia, that was an absolute gift, because I had the skeleton of the real story about what happened to her. I only had to put the flesh on the bones, but that's the only one that I knew exactly where it was going. I suppose it would be sensible to plan it all, but I think you might lose something in it, the spontaneity of suddenly think, all right, I'll have her falling off the cliff and dying. Or, you know, maybe I'll have her nearly drowning and having a, you know, an amazing sort of near-death experience. You know, I don't know. You just have to do what you think is right. I think there's someone down here wanted to ask something.
Have you published all the stories you've written, or are there stories that are hidden?
I wrote 3 books before my first book, Georgia, and all of them have gone in the dustbin because they weren't worth anything.
Did you decide that, or did you publish?
Nobody wanted to buy them.
No.
But I read them again a long while afterwards and realised they were absolute rubbish. They were quite right. Some of them were really embarrassing. So I didn't want anybody digging them out after I'd gone. And, you know, I thought that's time to deal with it. As far as I was concerned, all that stuff I wrote before was just an apprenticeship. There's a few short stories about in a file because short stories are quite hard to place, that I've written over the years that I don't think are too bad, and I've left them in a file just for posterity more than anything. But I would absolutely hate anybody to try and take over what I'd already done. I think it's I'm quite passionate about this thing about where Virginia Andrews, when she died, and somebody else carried on writing them. I think that's immoral. I think that, you know, if you bought a painting and it was somebody else decided they were going to paint a Monet, but it wasn't Monet, you would say that's fraud. And I think it's fraud if somebody else writes a book like yours, you know, as if it's from you. So I wouldn't want anybody to do that. I do believe, though, if I should die halfway through a book, the publisher has the right to take what you've written and get somebody else to finish it. And I don't like the idea of that either. So I should just make sure I finish a book before I snuff it.
You got a bit of an interview you did yesterday on the radio with your early childhood and your mum passing. Would you mind telling us that story?
No, not at all. Yes, when I was 3 when my mother died, and my father was away at sea, he was in the Royal Marines, and my brother was 2 years older than me. And she died of septicemia following a miscarriage while we were alone with her, and she wasn't found for 2 days, so it was 3 days. It's only because we were out in the snow without any coats on that it was alerted there was something wrong. And after that we had to go into orphanages, and we weren't even together. I was in one in London and my brother was in Gloucester, sort of, you know, 200 miles away from London, and my father was stationed at Chatham, which made it impossible for him to see Michael, because the train journeys in those days took forever. I did get to see him a couple of times, and then he found my stepmother from a marriage bureau because he was desperate to get us home. And it's quite a funny story about her, really, because she was such a dragon. But she went to the marriage bureau and she said she wanted a man. She'd been nursing in the army, so she was quite keen on forces, or men in uniform perhaps. Anyway, she said she wanted a preferably officer class, but she settled for an NCO. He must have at least 2 children in his own house and must be artistic. And Dad, bless him, passed all those things. He was Sergeant Major, and our surname was Sergeant as well. So my father was Sergeant, which has always been a bit ridiculous, you know. But there we are. That's how it happened, and it was they adopted the girl that I call my sister and the younger brother Paul. And we also had lots of foster children growing up, because my stepmother's sister was a children's officer in the East End of London. And that's another reason why I know a lot about the East End of London, because we used to have these children that came down from Poplar and things that were awful, you know, had lived in awful conditions. So from a very early age, I was very aware of the rest of how some people have to live. And in fact, when I was about 11 or 12, when we moved to London, I used to go to the clinic with my aunt to help weigh the babies in Poplar. And I can remember we have this series in England called Call the Midwife. Have any of you seen that? Yes. Well, you know, you see the fat bonny babies and that. Believe you me, they weren't like that there. They were, you know, prams full of piss and biscuits, you know, and white, scraggly looking babies. They weren't fat jolly ones, you know, it was a bit grim. But they have wonderful personalities, the people in the East End, but I think that gave me an interest in that kind of thing as well. Yes. Is that enough?
I can hear you do a lot of research. I mean, I know you have the personal experience. I mean, in the time that you write your book and your characters, I mean, you end up spending hours doing research, or you just write?
No. The historical books, all the research has to be done. When I did Never Look Back, the one about the wagon trains, I read over 200 history books, American history books, and I also did the whole Oregon Trail, albeit in a sports car, you know, to check it out. And I spent about 3 or 4 weeks in New York as well, checking out what was there in the olden days, you know, before everything got burnt and rebuilt and one thing and another. Yeah, you can't write a historical book without really checking. The book Hope, where I wrote about the Crimean War, I went to the Crimea, and it was the first time you were allowed into the Crimea when I went there, and I had to go on a sort of package tour and then escape so I could go to the battlefields to see what it was like. But I couldn't possibly write something like the Battle of Balaclava, for instance, without having been there to see what the terrain's like, you know. I can imagine, you know, and there's stuff written about who did what and, you know, what happened, but you need to see where it happened to get the feel for it.
Okay, the last thing we're going to do is we had some very nice ladies who wore their fascinators and their hats this evening, because we're going to give away some of Leslie's books. So, and I'd like Leslie to judge for us, if you wouldn't mind. Yes, so all the ladies with the hats and the fascinators, can you come to the front? We'd like a bit of a show, please. Can you get some music? Thank you. Music maestro. We have 2 prizes, so you can pick any 2 that you like. is the end of our program, ladies and gentlemen. If you would like Leslie to sign the books that you've bought, I'm sure she'd do that with pleasure. So if you'd like to come up to the front with your books, I'll organise a pen. Thank you.
I can never remember which ones we've got because the pages will have a
Yes.
the other is different. The second book. Now, which of these